The night was cold, the kind that bit through old wood and dry leather. The sky above the prairie stretched endless, full of stars that looked close enough to touch. The wind whispered through the empty fields, carrying the sound of crickets and far-off coyotes. Inside the small wooden house, Jacob Reed sat alone at his table. The lantern's glow fell over his hands, rough and scarred from years of work. He wasn't a young man anymore, but the years hadn't slowed him much. They had just made him quieter. It had been a long time since anyone had come to his door. People in town called him the rancher who keeps to himself. Some said he liked it that way. Truth was, he just didn't know what else to be anymore. His wife and little boy had been gone for nearly 10 years now. Fever had taken them in one short week, and the silence that followed never left his land. He had buried them on the hill behind the barn, where wildflowers grew in spring. Every evening when he finished his chores, he would look toward that hill before heading inside. That was his routine, and it kept him steady. But that night, just as he was about to blow out the lantern, a sound broke the quiet. It was faint at first, 3 gentle knocks. Jacob froze, his hand over the table. Nobody ever came this far from town, especially after dark. He got up slowly, his boots creaking against the floor, and opened the door halfway. A woman stood there in the dark. She was small, wrapped in a faded blanket that looked older than she was. Her hair was long and tangled, falling over her shoulders. Her face was tired, dirt on her cheeks, but her eyes were clear, dark, deep, and full of something between pride and fear. Her voice came out as a whisper, trembling but steady. "I just need a roof tonight." Jacob said nothing for a moment. He could tell from her dress and the beads on her wrists that she was Apache. He knew what that meant out here, how most men would turn her away or worse. But he wasn't most men. He saw no threat in her eyes, only exhaustion. She looked like someone who had been walking for days, maybe running from something. He finally nodded toward the barn. "You can stay out there. There's hay and it's dry." She lowered her head slightly in thanks. "That's enough." Jacob watched her walk through the yard, her shadow moving across the moonlight. Something about the way she carried herself made him pause, like someone too tired to fight anymore but too proud to fall. He shut the door and sat back at his table, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. After a few minutes, he took an extra blanket and stepped outside. The barn was dim, smelling of horses and straw. She sat near the corner, her arms folded, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked up when he entered, a bit startled. He placed the blanket beside her without a word. "You'll freeze out here," he said quietly. She met his eyes for a moment before answering. "I've been colder." Jacob almost smiled, a small crack in his usual silence. "What's your name?" "Naomi," she said after a pause. Then she added softly, "My people called me Naya, but that name brings trouble now." He nodded. "Rest, Naomi. There'll be coffee and bread on the porch when you wake." When he left, the wind had begun to pick up. The house felt emptier than before, and he found himself listening for any sound from the barn. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that woman standing in the doorway, her voice echoing in his mind. "I just need a roof tonight." By dawn, the sun broke through thin clouds. Jacob went about his chores like always, but his eyes kept drifting toward the barn. When he finally walked outside, he saw her standing by the well, drawing water. The sunlight touched her face, and for the first time he saw how young she really was, no more than 30. She moved with quiet grace, careful and respectful, as if she didn't want to disturb the land itself. He poured 2 cups of coffee and stepped onto the porch. She approached slowly, hesitant but not afraid. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she replied, her voice low. "Sit, eat," he told her. She took a small piece of bread, breaking it in half before tasting it. "Thank you," she murmured. Jacob watched her for a while. "You going somewhere?" "South," she said. "Maybe find work, maybe not. Just somewhere new." He frowned. "That's a long way, and it's dangerous alone." She gave a faint smile. "Everything's dangerous when you're alone." He had no answer to that. She finished her bread, thanked him again, and started to gather her things. The way she moved told him she'd done this many times, arriving, resting, leaving before anyone could get close. By noon, she was walking toward the horizon. Jacob watched from his fence line, arms crossed. The land stretched wide, golden under the sun, and her small figure seemed swallowed by it. He tried to shake the feeling that letting her go was wrong. But what could he do? She wasn't his problem, he told himself. Then he saw the sky change. A wall of dust appeared in the distance, an early storm rolling fast. He swore under his breath, saddled his horse, and rode out toward her trail. The wind hit hard, throwing grit in his eyes, and the air turned thick. When he found her, she was stumbling, trying to cover her face from the sand. "Stubborn fool," he muttered, reaching down. He pulled her up onto the saddle behind him, and she clung to him out of instinct. By the time they reached the ranch, both were covered in dust. Inside the house, Jacob helped her sit near the fireplace. She was shivering badly, her lips pale. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. For a moment she hesitated, maybe unused to kindness, but then she drank. "I told you I'd only stay one night," she said quietly, almost apologetic. Jacob looked at her, shaking his head. "Then it's a good thing I don't always listen." Her eyes softened and a tiny smile broke through. "You shouldn't help people like me," she said. "Maybe," he said. "But you're here and I don't see anyone else doing it." The storm lasted 2 full days. She helped around the house, tending to the fire and cleaning what she could. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. She told him she once had a small home near the mountains, but soldiers came and drove her people out. Since then, she had been moving from one camp to another, never staying long. She didn't ask for pity, just told it like a fact, as if she had accepted that pain was part of her life. Jacob listened in silence. He didn't judge her or ask questions she didn't want to answer. In return, she started to trust him in small ways, by sitting at the table, by laughing quietly when his old dog snored too loud, by humming soft songs in a language he didn't know. When the storm cleared, the air smelled fresh and clean. Naomi stepped outside, her eyes scanning the open land. "I'll leave in the morning," she said. Jacob looked at her, not wanting to admit the thought of her leaving unsettled him. "You could stay a few more days," he said. "Still plenty to do around here." She shook her head gently. "If I stay too long anywhere, people start asking questions." He studied her for a moment. "You think I'd ask?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "You haven't yet." That night the house felt different. Warmer somehow. Naomi sat near the window, sewing a tear in her blanket. Jacob poured coffee, his hand steady but his heart unsure. He glanced at her once and said softly, "You don't owe anyone an explanation." "Not here." She didn't answer at first, just stared at the rain tapping the glass. Then with a faint smile she whispered, "Maybe I'll wait till the road dries." Jacob nodded, pretending to focus on his cup, but inside he felt something shift, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was hope, maybe just company. But as the firelight flickered between them, both understood that whatever happened next, neither of them would face another storm alone. And somewhere deep in his heart, Jacob knew she had come asking for a roof, but she had found something else entirely. The next morning came soft and golden, sunlight spilling through the cracks in the shutters. Naomi was already awake, sitting by the window with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked calm, almost peaceful, but her eyes carried a quiet sadness, as if she already knew she didn't belong to stillness for long. Jacob stepped into the room holding 2 cups of coffee. He said nothing at first, just placed 1 cup on the table beside her. She nodded her thanks and blew gently over the steam. "You're leaving today?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded slowly. "The ground's dry now. I can travel again." Jacob looked out the window toward the wide plains. "Where will you go?" "South," she said. "Maybe the trading post near the hills. I'll see if anyone needs work there." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her quietly. She had brought life back into the house without even trying. The silence that used to weigh on him now felt full of meaning. "You could stay," he said softly. Naomi looked at him for a long time. "You've done enough. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Jacob frowned. "What kind of trouble?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. "There were men chasing us months ago, settlers who blamed my people for things we didn't do. Some of them don't stop hunting, even when there's no reason left. I thought I'd lost them, but they're like dust. You think they're gone and the wind brings them back." Jacob stayed silent. He knew that kind of hatred still roamed the frontier, blind and cruel. He also knew what it felt like to lose everything and keep walking, because there was nowhere else to go. "You think they'll come here?" he asked. "I don't know," she said softly. "But if they see me on your land, they won't care whose home it is." Jacob sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, then they'll have to deal with me. Naomi looked up, startled. You don't even know me. He gave a faint smile. I don't have to. You're a person who needed help. That's all I need to know. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of horses outside broke the quiet. Jacob frowned and walked to the window. 3 riders were approaching from the ridge, dusty, armed, their faces shadowed under wide hats. Naomi's hand trembled around her cup. It's them, she whispered. Jacob's heart hardened. He wasn't a man who looked for fights, but he knew when something wasn't right. The men dismounted near the fence, calling out rough greetings that didn't sound friendly. Jacob stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Morning, he called. The one in front, a tall man with a gray beard and cold eyes, nodded slightly. You seen an Apache woman pass through here? Jacob met his gaze without flinching. Can't say I have. The man's eyes narrowed. Funny. We saw footprints near the creek. Small ones. She might have come this way. Jacob shrugged. Tracks don't mean much out here. The wind changes things fast. The man smiled thinly, glancing toward the house. Mind if we look around? Jacob's voice stayed calm but firm. I mind. The 3 men exchanged looks. The air grew tense. The gray-bearded man took a slow step closer. We're just being careful, friend. Some of those folks steal horses and tools. Can't be too cautious. Jacob's jaw tightened. There's nothing here for you. Turn around. For a moment it looked like the man might press further, but something in Jacob's steady stare made him stop. The leader spat on the dirt and motioned to his men. Let's go. She won't last long out here anyway. They rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Jacob watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside. Naomi stood near the window, her face pale. You lied for me, she said quietly. He nodded. They had no right to ask. Her eyes softened. You could have told them. They might have left you alone. He poured water into a cup, his hands steady. Maybe. But I've had enough of losing people. Naomi didn't know what to say. The warmth in his tone broke through the fear that had clung to her for so long. For the first time in years, someone had chosen to stand beside her instead of turning away. That evening, the ranch felt different again. The horses were restless, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Jacob fixed the fence near the barn while Naomi gathered kindling for the fire. They didn't talk much, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. When darkness fell, Jacob came inside, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. Naomi was sitting at the table, sewing a torn sleeve. He watched her hands move with care, each stitch neat and patient. You were right, she said without looking up. The land changes everything. It makes you tougher, but also kinder. He smiled faintly. Or maybe it just reminds you what matters. She looked up at him then. And what matters to you, Jacob Reed? He paused before answering. Right now, that you're safe. Naomi's eyes glimmered in the firelight. She looked down again, but there was a small smile on her lips. You don't even know what to do with kindness, do you? He chuckled softly. Not anymore. Been a while? The next few days passed slowly. Naomi stayed, helping with chores and cooking simple meals. She had a way of bringing warmth into every corner of the house. Sometimes she would hum while she worked, and Jacob would stop whatever he was doing just to listen. One morning he found her outside, standing near the wildflower hill. She was looking at the 2 wooden markers there. When she turned around, her eyes were wet. Your family? He nodded. My wife and boy. She placed a hand gently on one of the markers. You've carried them a long time. Every day, he said quietly. She looked up at him. Then maybe it's time someone helped you carry the rest. Those words stayed with him for the rest of the day. He didn't answer, but his heart felt lighter. That night, the air turned cold again. Jacob added another log to the fire and looked at Naomi sitting by the window. If you still want to leave, I won't stop you, he said slowly. But I won't ask you to go either. She turned toward him, her expression soft and unsure. What if I stayed? Just for a while? He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Then you'd have a place here. No one would question it. Outside, the stars began to shine brighter, scattered across the sky like pieces of hope. Naomi moved closer to the fire, her blanket trailing behind her. I came here asking for a roof, she said, her voice quiet and full of feeling. But you gave me something I thought I lost a long time ago. Jacob looked at her gently. What's that? A reason to stop running. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The warmth between them said everything words couldn't. The wind outside softened, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. From that night onward, Naomi stayed. She worked beside Jacob, learned the rhythm of the ranch, and laughed more often than she ever thought she would. The two of them built a quiet life, not one of grand moments, but of small, steady peace. Sometimes, when travelers passed by, they'd see the rancher and the Apache woman working side by side, talking like they had known each other forever. Some called it strange, some called it wrong. But the two of them didn't care. They had both lost everything once, and now they had found enough. Years later, people still spoke of Jacob Reed, the man who once lived alone on the edge of nowhere, and the woman who came to his door asking for shelter. They said she only wanted a roof for one night, but when she left this world, she left it as the lady of the Reed Ranch, the woman who turned silence into home. And whenever the wind blew through the wildflower hill, it carried the soft echo of her words, words that had changed both their lives forever. "I just need a roof tonight," she had said. But Jacob had looked into her eyes that night and answered from the heart, "Stay forever."